Today, most of our readings are all about John the Baptist. This is sort of John the Baptist Day in our Advent season. And whenever I think about John the Baptist, and I think about this story, obviously my mind starts thinking about just water in general, because this was the substance which John was using to baptize people. But as being a sort of history nerd, I'm also thinking about the history of water. And there is something kind of fascinating that's sort of behind all of these stories about John out in the wilderness that make today's story, the claim that all the people of Jerusalem and all the cities and everyone was flocking to him out in the wilderness. That claim is really interesting if we know a little bit of the story of that region. So, shortly before Jesus arrives on the scene, the Romans have now been over Judea and Galilee where Jesus is ministering for a while now. But shortly before Jesus is born, they really start undergoing a major building project. That was sort of one of the main things that the Romans loved to do when they conquered somewhere, was to sort of impress people with all of their great engineering and all of their great culture and all of their great amenities. And so what we know about the life, the world that Jesus lived in, was that all around him, there were these great cities like springing up everywhere. Great Roman cities. Cities that had statues and great walls and architecture and mosaics and artwork. And the best thing of all, especially in a desert place like that, flowing water. Running water. And so we hear about Jesus going to some of these places. Tiberias or Caesarea. We hear about Jesus doing ministry in these places. And these cities would have been magnificent cities for people like Jesus, who grew up kind of in the countryside without running water, without a whole lot of civilization. This is how most of the people of Jesus' day were used to living, out in the country. But the Romans show up, and they start building aqueducts and fountains and running water and culture and beauty and music and all these things. And what's really interesting that we know is that a lot of people that were living in villages where Jesus was born, where Jesus was raised, they were all leaving. And they were going to these big cities. And so, why I find that fascinating is because then I hear this one little line that is so easy to skip over in today's gospel reading. Everyone from Jerusalem, big city, and all of the surrounding cities, everyone, not a lot of people, everyone, were flocking to John the Baptist out in the countryside, out at the banks of the Jordan River. And those of you, there's several of you here who have been to the Jordan River. Not that pretty. Yeah, okay, I see people shaking their heads. Kind of a muddy river, right? So we have to ask ourselves, what is happening here? That people who had already flocked and who had left behind the dusty, uninspiring, ugly wilderness of village life to go to these grand, running water, modern cities of Rome to go live, are now reversing their tracks. And now leaving all of that beauty and all of that Roman wonder and all of that clean, cold, running water to go out to the desert where it is dusty, where the water is stagnant and muddy and brown, to see a man who is living out in the desert, by all stretches of the imagination, does not smell good, whose hair is unkept, who's wearing a camel hair clothes, and is only eating bugs and wild honey. There is something that they discovered there. John's message had something of life to it, something of beauty to it, something of the experience of God breaking in on their lives, despite the fact that John's message did not come with any of the conventional images of beauty or of culture or of sophistication that the Romans were offering so many people in the cities like Jerusalem and Caesarea and Tiberias. And so I got to thinking this week about this sort of side-by-side. And these side-by-side of two different experiences that the people of Jesus' day were seeing. Wild, dirty, smelly John the Baptist at an ugly river in the dusty desert. And beauty and art and culture and modernization in the Roman cities. And I got to thinking about us. And that in our Christian church and in our Christian tradition, we have a kind of sometimes helpful, but sometimes problematic relationship with beauty. And I'm really just I'm not talking about anything sort of overly philosophical here. I'm really talking about aesthetic beauty. That so often we are associating things that are beautiful with things that inspire us, with things that lift our hearts up to God, with things that give us some sort of experience of God. This has been the church's sort of bread and butter for a long time, of creating churches that are objectively beautiful, of composing music that is beautiful, of performing and sort of living out liturgy and ritual and prayers that are written eloquently and that are, by all means, just beautiful. Whether you believe it or not, you just say, "Well, that's beautiful." And I also thought, because I'm thinking about John here, John the Baptist, I'm thinking about this space that he's occupying out in the Jordan. I'm even thinking about, in our sort of modern life as a church, there is a strong emphasis or a strong movement towards, and hear me about what I'm about to say, is that I am critiquing this, but also I completely understand this and find myself in this camp so often, of that in our life we are so seeking, especially our modern American life, we are so seeking sort of spiritual encounters, religious experiences, that one of the things many of us Americans are gravitating to is just going out and being in nature, right? I think a lot of us can resonate with that. I know that this congregation, we resonate with that, right? This is part of who we are, and I think there's many people that you would encounter that would say, I find God out in the mountains. I find God at the beach. I find God on a hike. I'm with you on all that, and I don't doubt that you can find and be inspired and find revelation and find enlightenment in those outdoor spaces. In fact, it is so much so that we have in our own denomination now congregations springing up who do not have physical spaces. They are what we'd call wild churches. And they are gathering people, a lot of young people, a lot of sort of people who have left the church, who are kind of fed up with the church. And so they found a sanctuary by going on these hikes in these state parks and national parks. And this is what they do for worship. I love that idea. I am so glad that we have pastors and congregations that are doing that. Great, go for it. However, one little critique I have is that one of the things that is so often left unsaid when we are talking about finding God in outdoor spaces or finding God in nature is that, if we're being honest, what we have to add to that sentence is, we are finding God out in nature where it is beautiful. Right? We're finding God not just in nature. Let's be honest. We are finding God in the places of nature that are beautiful. The national parks, the state parks that have been maintained because they are aesthetically more beautiful than just the park around the street from us. Right? We are finding God at a sunset because a sunset is just aesthetically more beautiful than high noon. Because if it is so, that it is just, we can find God out in nature, then I always wonder, these congregations and these people that are going to seek God, why are they not gathering for worship at the truck stop on I-20? That's nature. Right? That's the outdoors. So, I'm not knocking it. What I am saying is that beauty captivates our interest. Beauty captivates our attention. And beauty absolutely elevates our eyes to think of things that are so much beyond the ugliness of this world. But something that we have done, not only in the Christian church, but also in sort of the pop culture spirituality, is relegated religious experience to things that are beautiful. We are expecting to find God in music and in songs that stir us because they are emotionally beautiful. And in spaces, church spaces, state parks, beaches, whatever it be, because they are aesthetically beautiful. In words and in sermons that are eloquent and beautiful. In church services that are well-oiled performance machines with all of the emotive lights and energy and screens and technology and charismatic preaching, because they are emotive, because they are beautiful, objectively, aesthetically. And God is there. But here also is John the Baptist. And there is nothing about John the Baptist that is beautiful. Aesthetically speaking. Spiritually, maybe. He is unkept. He is smelly. His words are not particularly eloquent. They're kind of harsh and rash. And he is out baptizing people in disgusting, muddy, stagnant water. All while people are in the distance, in the midst of real Roman cultural art and beauty. The thing about beauty is not that you can't find God there. The thing is, if we are only associating our religious experiences, our worship experiences, our spiritual encounters with God in things that are aesthetically beautiful, the thing about beauty, though, is that it's kind of rare. And the thing about beauty is that it also requires a little bit of engineering and some skill, right? We need artists and architects and worship designers and worship leaders and skilled musicians and paid choirs and fancy vestments and state parks and national parks. Beauty requires some work. So if we've relegated our experience of God and our emotional, heart-connected experience with God to only those places that are beautiful, you have now narrowed down the playing field for your religious experience. But here's the good news about experiencing God out with John the Baptist, smelly, hairy, eating locusts and bugs and baptizing you with mud. The good news is that ugliness, pretty easy to find, actually, and requires no work at all, right? We just roll out of bed in the morning and look at the mirror and go, oh gosh, I got to do something about this, right? Things that are not quite aesthetically perfect, aesthetically pleasing, that don't really inspire us with sort of emotional awe or captivate our eyes, is everywhere. And God, as we say in our creed every Sunday, God created all things, visible and invisible. God is not just relegated to beautiful churches, our beautiful Sunday services, our beautiful parks, our beautiful sunsets. God is also experiencing, encountering us in things that sometimes repulse our eyes or our nostrils or even our ears. The bad music, right? The croaking of someone that you're sitting next to who maybe quite can't sing, but is still singing like they can, right? That is a beautiful religious experience, even if it is not a beautiful aesthetic experience, right? In a church building that's not, we have a lovely church building, but it is no, St. Paul's Cathedral in London, right? Mary, you just got back from London, right? All right. So poor Mary, she went off to London. She saw all these beautiful cathedrals, and Elise went too. I expect Elise to say the snarky thing. So yeah, right. So she sees all these beautiful cathedrals and then comes back here and like, well, Besides cute, but,
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, see, she's with me. Okay, so you see what I'm talking about is that John is showing us these two pictures of John and the Roman cities, of John and the Jordan and the Roman cities and the running water. Is reminding us not only does God show up in the ugly experiences of our life, in the mundane experiences, but actually I would go one step further and say that the story of the Bible is almost telling us that God actually prefers to experience and encounter us in things that are not very aesthetically pleasing. God encounters us in mud in the banks of the Jordan. God talks to Moses from a burning, scraggly bush out in a scraggly wasteland of rocks and twigs while he's shepherding smelly sheep, and he also has not been bathed probably in months. But that's where God shows up. And we are about to celebrate a holiday that, despite how beautiful and pristine and nice and pretty and aesthetically beautiful all of our nativity sets are, this was not a beautiful sight. I mean, those of you who have had children, right? I don't think you were probably glowing and looking like this right after you gave birth. If you were, okay, that's a miracle. So now imagine a teenage mother, poor, who is forced to give birth not in something beautiful, not in your beautiful manger scenes, probably in something like a cave, where they have kept for a long time, so think about what that implies, livestock. There is nothing about the Christmas story that is aesthetically beautiful. It stinks. Mary is sweating. Mary is disheveled and crying probably. There's hay everywhere and dirty animals and God knows what other things in this dark, dingy cave. So not only is God able to experience us in things that don't necessarily pique our eyes, or our ears, or our senses, but sometimes, and actually more often than not, God is encountering us in the things that repel our senses, that kind of offend our eyes and offend our ears and offend our senses. And that is such good news. That is such good news. Because it doesn't require us to be like Romans, who spend all of our time and our money and our energy trying to build palatial things that look beautiful and that sound beautiful and that have clean water. We get to just experience God that is actually in our life full of ugliness. The good news is that ugliness is not scarce. And so my invitation for us in this Advent season, I think you can probably already see and connect the dots of to where I'm going in thinking about what does it mean to be able to really look for God and to expect religious experiences in things that are not perfect, things that don't look very beautiful, or sound very beautiful, or smell very beautiful, and how that even might relate to your own soul, the places that do not smell, look, or sound very beautiful. So I'm going to just let that linger and let you take that where it goes. And I'm just going to leave you with one really practical thing. Because what we're talking about is something very tangible, beauty. The American poet Wendell Berry says, "There is no such thing as sacred and unsacred places. There are only sacred places and desecrated places." And so when we are actually thinking about a spirituality, finding God out in nature, I would encourage you and invite you to not always just look for that beautiful sunset or that pristine beach or that mountaintop experience. But I was not entirely joking when I said, why are you not worshiping at the oil-stained parking lot of the truck stop here? That is a sacred place. Desecrated, maybe, but still sacred. Our attentiveness to God's creation cannot just be determined by the creation that is beautiful and pleasing to us. If anything, our attention should be to the places of nature and creation that are ugly, that have been desecrated. The creek that has lawn chairs and tires floating in it. The paved over parking lot. The property that has been leveled of trees. Right? None of those places are beautiful. They don't take your breath away. But what would happen if we said to ourselves, I will worship there. I will flock there. Just like they were doing for John the Baptist. I will find God there. And if you really need a really concrete example, just because I'm seeing her in my periphery, and I know she might. Anyway, I'm going to put her on the spot whether she likes it or not. Is Sharon, who walks every day, pretty much, right? If you ever watch Sharon walking along the sidewalk, you will notice her stopping along the way to pick up trash. Is that not a symbol of worshiping in desecrated places? Of treating as sacred the places that are riddled with trash just as much as the places that have wonderful sunsets and grand trees. And so I want to end with this, is that our last verse today in the prophet Isaiah reminds us about God's dwelling. And God's dwelling is every place beautiful and every place that looks ugly. But what we know from the prophet Isaiah is this, that his dwelling will be glorious. Amen.